under fading skies. Tattered flags waving dreams in our eyes. The crowds roar like a storm on the wind. We're the underdogs fighting again.
What's going on, guys, and welcome to another edition of Stateside Footy. It's your boy Steve, and joining me tonight is somebody who is no stranger to the program, and he is also one heck of a dude, man. It's Jeff Lageson from Prost International. Good evening, Jeff. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Grandchild on the way. Life is good.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah.
Very good. That's an exciting time. So, congratulations to you and your family. I would probably assume that you're about to spoil the absolute shit out of that grandchild. You know, that's usually what grandchildren are for, right?
This is known. It is known.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Pump them full of candy and send them back to their parents. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Check. No. So listen, I wanted to do this show tonight because something popped off on social media, and of course, yeah, I know it's social media driven. And for me, I find it complete rage. I find it complete nonsensical, and I find it complete rage bait. But that being said, when I see these type of things, it gets the mind turning because of the ridiculous of the nature, and of course the idea of an MLS quota when it comes to the U.S. men's national team. And of course, this was sparked off by a roundtable discussion that was held on Fox Sports, and of course it involved three of our former U.S. men's national team coaches, Bob Bradley, Jurgen Klinsmann, and Steve Sampson. And it was hosted by Stu Holden, who was obviously a part of Bob Bradley's cycle back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And the interesting thing about it was that Stu Holden actually asked the question, and from that standpoint, it literally sparked like the biggest, I would call it a shitstorm on social media, because that's exactly what it is. Stu Holden actually point blank asked if there was any type of interference or if there was any type of meddling when it comes to roster decisions, when it comes to Major League Soccer and their involvement when it comes to the national team. And Bob Bradley flat out said, no, absolutely not. Now, that doesn't mean that he was taken to New York and they had discussions on players. From that standpoint, he was willing to admit that. But at the end of the day, the roster decisions for his Confederations Cup or his World Cup that he had were squarely on his shoulders and him and his coaching staff shoulders, as it should be. But that being said, it didn't necessarily stop people from saying, see, there is at least interference. I guess you can say, sideways interference when it comes to it. And you and I, Jeff, were talking about this just before we went on. And it's like, yeah, you're right. I guess you can say it's interference. But that being said, there's nothing wrong with the league, essentially wanting their players to be on the World Cup roster because obviously of the notoriety of what it means to be in it. But that being said, coaches from MLS sides are always lobbying for their players because it is a number one, it's a good thing because obviously you want some of your best players to be recognized for the hard work that they put in, especially if they've earned the right to go to a World Cup. So from that standpoint, yeah, of course, Bob Bradley was fully willing to admit that. But the idea that, there's like this secret cabal between Major League Soccer and MLS where they sit a coach into a room, like there's a two-way mirror and there's a cop behind the glass and Doug Garber sitting there across the table and saying, listen, you have 6 roster spots. All of those go to Major League Soccer. We don't care who, but it goes. No, it's like, no, come on, man. They're like, there's no secret waterboard torture program in U.S. soccer. You know what I mean? Like, the coaches don't have that ball tied around their ankle. I don't necessarily think that. But what I will say is that it's not uncommon for confederations, and nations around the world to have their top flight, lobby for certain players. It's a common thing in international football where there may be interest because a certain player is tied to X amount of dollars when it comes to sponsorship revenue. And so from that standpoint, there is a monetary stake on that player wearing that crest when it comes to the World Cup. That's understandable as well too. But that being said, at the end of the day, it goes against roster construction, from the deepest in the deepest sense. But that being said, we're going to get into this, Jeff. And first and foremost, I kind of want to know your thoughts and your feelings on the quote unquote MLS quota. Because you and I in this show, we're going to go back all the way, back to the Steve Sampson era, and we're going to lay the foundation on whether or not this thing is legit or whether or not it's complete bullshit. I think we're going to err on the side of bullshit. But that being said, let's start off with your thoughts and feelings on this idea of an MLS quota.
The notion of an exact quota, a specific thing, is just not something that holds up. It doesn't hold up that there is such a thing. That's the sort of conspiracy theory that just doesn't work. I don't see Garber having that kind of influence. But it does create the place to have this conversation. And this conversation is where is it influence? Where is it the legitimate place for teams and clubs and coaches and leagues to push for their guys? They should be pushing for their guys. People should be supporting their guys and saying, hey, give my guy a look. He really deserves it. And that's fine. The question is when it crosses the line and where that line is. And this today, when you pinged me and I'd seen the clip that you were talking about, what it really says to me is where's that line and what's meddling and what's just pushing for your guys. The whole thing is just, there's no way coaches would stay in those jobs if they were
correct
doing things. If you look at the guys who've been in these jobs, they had other jobs. If you're at the national team level, your opportunities continue to exist. You're just not going to put up with it. And we'll track our way back to Sampson and that, as we talked about. I can see though that the dysfunction that we've seen in this cycle, specifically from U.S. Soccer and the way it's had coaches, we had coming out of from 22 to now, that dysfunction doesn't help a lot of the perception of what's going on in the national team program because we've seen such flux in everything. But I think that this just begs the question and gives us an opportunity to have a really appropriate conversation about where lines are and how national teams are built. And we've talked about this off camera. I think we have some real strong thoughts on that.
Absolutely. And, the interesting thing is that, back in, and by the way, I think you were referencing the Gio Reyna debacle and the way that U.S. Soccer handled Gio Reyna and the Reynas as a whole. And then, of course, the debacle of bringing back Greg Berhalter for that second go round and the missteps. You're absolutely right. And when you see that level of, I guess I'll use the term tomfuckery, it opens the door for people to question the integrity of the federation and whether or not there's actually competent people at the top running it, because I can't remember a scenario with another national team or a federation that would that would actually have that type of dysfunction, especially considering that Matt Crocker took the bag with Saudi Arabia less than 60 days from a home World Cup. I can't really recall that type of shenaniganry happening to another federation that's hosting a World Cup, but I digress. The interesting thing is, going back to, the Steve Sampson era, and that was kind of an interesting era. And for those that don't know, Steve Sampson originally was the interim head coach after Bora Milutinovic left. And, Milutinovic left because they actually wanted him to expand his duties. Milutinovic is one of those gypsy coaches that just loves to have the whistle around his neck. He was like, I call Irv Renard the modern day Bora Milutinovic, because he is that type of dude. He's a barnstormer, and he's just one of those old coaches that just likes to be on the training ground. He didn't like to do any of that clerical stuff. And so when U.S. Soccer came to Bora and said, hey, we want you to essentially be what would be considered now a technical director, he basically said, screw all that noise. I'm going to go take the China job. Or whatever job he took after the U.S. Soccer Federation. And in stepped Steve Sampson, who actually led the club in the 95 Confederations Cup. And as a matter of fact, it was that tournament where I think we beat Argentina 3-0.
Going down to the Copa was such a great moment for U.S. Soccer, because they had some momentum. You had momentum coming out of a World Cup where they got out of the group, even though they lost to Brazil. The MLS was getting set to launch. He takes over a team that had a lot of guys looking for where they were getting their work. You had the Winaldas and a few guys over in England and Germany. Our goalkeeping was getting that with Casey, and he went out and he just kind of caught fire, and then took them through qualifying 96, 97, and guys like Brian McBride emerged, and that team was necessarily MLS heavy. Because all of the guys had come back to help launch MLS. That was his player pool. And then right before he did the weirdest roster and 3-6-1 shift that took all of that and just shifted it aside. And then,
the 98 Cup.
Like in March, right before, suddenly it was like he dropped a bunch of guys and instituted a 3-6-1. If you don't know your history on that, look it up. It's bizarre. And so his team was necessarily MLS heavy.
Yeah, it had to be.
It had to be. Going into the next cycle, they hire an MLS successful coach. They bring in Bruce. Bruce's team is also MLS heavy because that was where the players were. If you guys were trickling, our goalkeeper pool was mostly in England because you started having, KC and those guys were over there. And so those teams and the MLS role was necessary, because that was sort of the purpose of early MLS, was to give those guys the place to play as professionals. And over time it's shifted. So when they asked Sampson, he's got to be saying to himself, of course my team was MLS heavy. Who else did I have?
Right. And I think it's also important to understand the role that U.S. Soccer had at the turn of the century, because that was also a period where MLS teams were relying heavily on NFL teams as well, too, because a lot of those teams were playing in multi-purpose stadiums. They didn't necessarily have their own training grounds. They were heavily reliant on NFL training facilities. And of course, they didn't have academies. And so U.S. Soccer launched the residency program for, I believe it was the U17. Project 40. And I think it was also Project 2010 as well too. The idea
there was a couple of different
projects. Right. And it was the same idea of the residency program when the 94 guys pre-World Cup 94, where they were in that same residency. They wanted to do it on a youth level because there still was no academies. And the idea was that if these U17s, and of course that was Oguchi Onyewu, Kyle Beckerman, Landon Donovan, DeMarcus Beasley, is some of the biggest names that O'Brien, some of the biggest names that we understand. The idea was that obviously if they can be in an environment where they can train, and of course if they are able to showcase on an international level, then they would also get potential European jobs at a early age, which would obviously spike the level, the level of the national team. But at the very least, there's going to be professional spots with them in Major League Soccer.
And
right?
it was to get the 18 to 21-year-olds out of the college game. The real pro prospects. It was to pull them out of the limits of you get 20 games a year, and if you do anything more, you lose eligibility and all of the rules that used to be in place then. That was to pull those guys out of that.
Very good point.
At the time. And that got us through that early turn of the century era. We had, oddly enough, our most successful run.
Yep.
That team has the one knockout round win against, of all people, Mexico. They were better than Germany in the quarterfinal. Just unlucky not to win that, like to have that game go their favor. That was a good team. And it was MLS heavy. You had Johnny O'Brien and a couple of guys. But that was Sane. It was McBride before going to Fulham. It was Landon, who was then with the Earthquakes and all those different things. So you had an MLS heavy, but it was also it was basically, the Hamilton line, young, scrappy, and hungry team. And they went out there and they grabbed it by the horns, and they made it happen against Portugal and just punched them in the face. And that was a Portugal team with Galacticos. You had Figo and them,
Yep.
So that team, those teams were necessarily MLS heavy.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really apply to the concept of it. That takes us into the next cycle where they kept Bruce. And guys start going over.
Yep.
And then guys start going.
Yeah. And that's where we were introduced to Clint Dempsey and Jimmy Conrad and some of these other guys. But again, when you look at the player pool, again, it's very MLS heavy, because at the time, most of those players needed to use the national team in order to get that bounce where they can actually move across the pond. And so from that standpoint, when you're relying on your youth, you're relying on MLS squads. And again, there really can't be any influence when it comes to Major League Soccer or when it comes to U.S. soccer, when your essentially national team is essentially dependent on your domestic player pool. You have the outliers,
and MLS was going through its contraction.
Yep.
They tried to expand, then contracted. It was briefly it was questionably in existence in that time period.
Correct. Correct.
And that was pre the restart. You had some new ownership groups starting to come in. The O2 success definitely bailed out a lot of MLS in its perception, because those players coming from there. But that next group of players coming into 06, you started seeing guys getting those opportunities, and that's when we started to really embrace the hexagonal. Why it was the greatest thing that we've ever had is U.S. soccer fans was the hexagonal, and the matches with Mexico and Costa Rica and stuff. That was my favorite era of supporting and going to matches, was going to those qualifiers in that era, because those games were so intense, and they led to guys like McBride getting those jobs overseas.
Correct.
They got it from the display they had in those really important internationals, especially the qualifiers, because those games just had such a profile and a different feel at the time, because you didn't have the overexpanded, diluted World Cup pool that we have now. Which is
tell me how you really feel about the current World Cup setup. No, and it's incredibly ridiculous. But that off the back end of the 06 World Cup, and of course the I guess you can say it was a debacle of a World Cup. It was
disappointing. It was disappointing.
And we get grouped, and that ended the Bruce Arena era. And then in comes Bob Bradley, essentially a no-nonsense shit kicker, which is something that's a little bit different than what those players experience under Bruce Arena. But it was at this stage where we actually had an expanded pool, because when you're looking at it, I think Stu ended up going to Bolton. I think Charlie went to, like Denmark or Sweden.
He was playing for he was playing in that Northern European era.
Yeah,
those guys. Yeah,
Dempsey and I think, I don't know if McBride had already come back or he was on his way back, but Deuce was certainly in Fulham. And you saw an expanded player pool because we actually, at that point in time, that era, we actually had the most European, I guess you can say the most European involvement of American players up to that point. And of course, you started seeing more expansion teams in Major League Soccer. Toronto
and
comes
better
in,
professional environments
correct.
in those expansion teams for
Right,
training.
because I think Toronto comes in 08, Seattle comes in 09, Portland comes in, I believe, in 10, and then 11, and then Vancouver comes in as well too. And so, you see in that Bob Bradley era that Major League Soccer expands, and which means there's obviously more involvement for U.S. domestic-based players. So the domestic pool expands. And so I guess you can say that maybe Major League Soccer involvement influence kind of grows in that period, because before that, what I like to call the dead era of Major League Soccer, because people forget, like, the product of Major League Soccer from essentially 99 to 04, 05 was dreadful. You know what I mean? Like, we had very good players that made the national team, but that being said, like, the competitive level of Major League Soccer in that era was absolutely dreadful, and yet it survived to get to the expansion era. And with it, we start seeing teams like Seattle, Toronto start to bring in some of their local youth players, which is how we get the DeAndre Yudlins and the Christian Roldans and the Jordan Morrises of the world that would go on to later feature for the national team. But that being said, this is kind of where this conversation kind of picks up in the Bob Bradley era, because with the expansion of Major League Soccer, me personally, I feel like this is where their influence kind of gets a little bit bigger, because what once was thought to be a dead entity all of a sudden ends up turning into be like, oh wait, we actually have billionaires investing into this league.
Yeah, and then you also, and again, so Bruce had us 02, the best World Cup showing, and then Bob had the most interesting international success with the Confederations Cup final and beating Spain and whatnot. So those teams being so MLS heavy were actually very successful in different ways, but they were also scrappy. They were toughened by the qualifying matches going down to Central America. The guys that were coming overseas were playing in places where they had to just really work for it. Fulham was not exactly a glamour job, but they were getting their opportunities in those sorts of situations, which means they were really getting toughened. You're really toughened up to get there, and you were dealing with work permits and things that are a little different now. And then that brings us to Jurgen. Yeah. And that whole era changed a lot because he had the much less his group of guys approach. Like, Bradley had kind of his core of guys, and as long as they were playing, that was fine. Arena had his kind of core of guys, and they were playing. And then Jurgen, it felt like everything was constantly in flux, like he was trying to keep trying to keep the fire under him by just not letting anybody have that guaranteed spot for long periods of time. And that was a different approach that those guys hadn't faced. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I did well, I'll be called right back in. No, you were just like constantly pushed in a different direction. His roster construction was much different from international window to international window. It felt like the player pool just suddenly rapidly expanded, but also a lot more guys were getting positions overseas, and you're seeing a lot more of them in a lot more leagues and a lot more good clubs, right? And that definitely affected a lot. And again, what's MLS's influence in that?
But here's the interesting thing about this, right? And I go back to this because I think this is kind of interesting, because if there was a push, let's just say, for hypotheticals here, let's say there was an MLS push for certain guys to to be, I guess you can say, vaunted up into, I guess you can say, the upper echelon of U.S. men's national team players, right? Let's just say that, Jurgen was asked to do it and Jurgen said no. The interesting thing that happened in the summer of 2013 was after 5 years in England, Clint Dempsey takes the bag for Major League Soccer. 4 years guaranteed to come back to the American shores. So if you're not necessarily going to do what we would like you to do, then we're going to do like maybe that was the thinking. Although I don't think that necessarily was. But if you're not going to necessarily showcase the players that we would like you to showcase, then we're going to bring some of these guys back to the U.S. shores.
And the guys started cutting checks.
Yeah,
here.
Clint Dempsey, Josie Altidore, Michael Bradley, Mix Diskerud came over. Jermaine Jones came back over.
And Casey had come back to finish his career.
Casey came back to finish his career. Yeah.
And eventually, Howard came back and played in Colorado.
Yep.
But also, you started having more ambitious ownership groups in MLS. Level of play increased, level of training increased. You hear Donovan and a lot of stuff talking about like the training of that era, compared to, you hear a lot of these guys talking about what it was like in that era to be an MLS player. And it doesn't sound like they were in professional environments at all. They weren't in first division professional environments in training.
Right.
And so now you have the training facilities start getting built, your Seattles and whatnot, start making sure that they have, the Starfire, which has led to eventually now Renton, were difference makers. That's why Seattle was able to bring in a Dempsey. That's why they were able to have an Obafemi Martins partner with him.
Right.
Those sorts of moves didn't happen before. And as the league was expanding, you just kept bringing in more and more ownership groups that were a little more willing to splurge. Now, a lot of that splurge went on to foreign talent to come in to make a splash for marketing, but some of your American players came back and made some bank here, and then they'd catch a lot of crap like Dempsey caught for coming back and playing here and taking the money. But at the same time, it's like,
are you going to say no? Are you going to say no to 4 years at $35 million? I don't think so. That's that's life-changing money. But
generationally,
this was also
changing money.
Oh yeah, for sure. And don't get me wrong, like he had signed, I think, a 3-year deal with Spurs. I think it was like for 9.5 a season. He only lasted 1 season before coming back to the United States. But it's not like he wasn't making peanuts over there. But there is a difference between making solid Premier League money and then also coming over here and taking advantage of a league that's going to overpay you for the age and where you're at. But
his
what
game
I will
didn't
say
drop off either, which didn't hurt his game.
But I also that's exactly that's a point that's worth talking about as well too, because a lot of people thought that he would just come here, take the bag, and kind of slow down a little bit. If anything, he kept his level of production up in Seattle, because at the time he was Jurgen's captain. A lot of people forget that he was Jurgen's captain, but Jurgen was anti-MLS, if anything, because he was the one that was telling all of his young players to move across the pond to challenge themselves, because Major League Soccer still at that stage wasn't nearly on the level of where he thought some of his top players should be at. As a matter of fact, when Clint took the bag and when Michael took the bag from Toronto, and same thing with Josie, he was actually upset at those three. He was
pretty pissed at Donovan, and in part why I think it was that Donovan went over and did his Everton stint and things like that, and then didn't stay. I think that made him that soured Klinsmann on Donovan as much as anything else was his unwillingness to stay over there when he went over there and actually played really well for Everton, had a nice little run. But the guys started coming back. You have a lot more guys then jumping the pond as teens.
Yep.
You no longer needed your Project 40 type projects. and a lot of guys start getting over, and that in that window leading to the 2018 failure to qualify is where the Pulisic's and guys were teenagers playing for decent European clubs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you had Pulisic was with Dortmund. Who was McKinney with at that point? Was he?
Ooh, good question.
He wasn't in Italy
Correct.
yet. And so some of those guys were starting to get those sorts of looks. And as is always controversial, dual nationals always become a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You start fighting with other countries to convince guys to come in. You know, in the 90s, we'd had Tom Dooley and David Reggie and some of these guys to some controversy, becoming national players.
By the way, McKinney was with Schalke.
Yeah, he was in Bundesliga team.
Yeah,
you know? Yeah, he was in a good club, and those guys were getting those opportunities. And a lot of it led to the guys that are coming up and playing, you know, Pepe's and all those guys have those jobs now because the success of those players created a bit of a rub to the next wave coming in right behind them that aren't of significantly different age, but we're right behind them. And then, but 18 didn't happen.
Right. The interesting thing during that time period within U.S. soccer, because I believe that Jurgen Klinsmann was also the technical director as well as the head coach, and so he oversaw the youth national teams during that time frame. And I believe Tab Ramos was one of his youth coaches. At
Ramos
the time.
had the U20s for a long time.
Yeah, you had the U20s, but I also think it's notable to say that during that time frame in U.S. soccer, we didn't qualify for the Olympics for a very long time.
Yeah, there was several Olympic cycles we failed to qualify for.
Several Olympic cycles, and I also think also down the youth level, I also think there wasn't really a lot of success when it comes to winning some of those youth championships as well too. And so from that standpoint, the U.S. youth program weren't pumping players up at an accelerated rate as did Major League Soccer at the time, because Major League Soccer, believe it or not, was actually kicking up youth prospects at that time, and some of those guys were actually making the jump across as well too.
Yeah, the youth programs were still trying to funnel guys to scholarships. Yeah, like that pivot hadn't really occurred yet. Yeah, the O2 team also had a lot of guys who had been successful in the 2000 Sydney Olympic team, the U23s, which a lot of those were, made the medal round. They ended up in fourth. They didn't medal, but they made it to the medal round. And then we didn't see an awful lot of Olympics for a while. And so those youth tournaments were really beneficial. But also, like, the 94 team got a lot out of the Barcelona Olympic team and things like that. So the Atlanta Olympic team really helped the 98 team. Those youth tournaments turned out, those age group tournaments were really beneficial when we didn't have the international jobs that those guys eventually now have. Because we can have a national team that's very good that doesn't touch MLS.
I would agree. Yeah. But the interesting thing about the Jurgen Klinsmann era, on top of the fact that, you know, he was unceremoniously sacked, is the entire Landon Donovan fiasco leading into the 2014 World Cup. Me personally, I didn't like the way that Jurgen Klinsmann did it. Me personally, I feel like there's a right way and there's a wrong way to deliver shit news to somebody, but, you know, to deliberately do it on a Friday when the media has left and Sunil Gulati and his crew had already gotten on a plane, knowing that there was not going to be any blowback. Me personally, I don't like the way that Jurgen did it, but Jurgen did it. But here's where I always go back to when it comes to this discussion, because Landon Donovan really, even at that point in time, he was the bell cow for U.S. soccer, even though Dempsey had kind of risen. And I think that Jurgen kind of wanted to transition. Obviously, he did. He wanted to transition away from Donovan for Dempsey because he valued Dempsey as a player. Okay, great. But the reality was that Landon Donovan was worth millions of dollars to U.S. soccer when it came to sponsorship revenue. There was a monetary figure attached to Landon Donovan wearing a U.S. shirt. And a lot of that sponsorship in 2014 surrounding the US's involvement in the World Cup revolved around Landon Donovan, because he was obviously MLS's biggest
and that was when the Galaxy utterly dominated MLS marketing and everything.
Correct.
Like that was very much the LA Galaxy era of being the forefront of what US soccer wanted to be, was that team, and Donovan was the face of that.
Correct. And the reality is if there was any type of influence from Major League Soccer or US soccer, there would have been intervention immediately. Right? Like if Jurgen Klinsmann went to Sunil Gulati or Don Garber and said, listen, we're not taking him. And if there really was, there would have been like, no, you're taking him. From the standpoint of everything that I just said, but the reality was that he was left behind, which, at the very least, it kind of goes to show you that Jurgen had control over his rosters.
The only way Jurgen was going to not get to pick, he would have walked.
He would have walked.
He would have absolutely walked. His reputation was still so solid at the time, and he was still one of the hot. We were fortunate to get Jurgen Klinsmann at the time. Like that was BFD. That was a lot. And Klinsmann's influence was stronger than anything else. He was a big personality, and I don't think that people would have tried to push him. I think the other end of it was the other ways. I think there was almost fear of what he represented and who he was. Like he was the big guy. Like they just sort of accepted what he did in that first cycle.
Right. And the interesting thing about his World Cup roster was the fact that he relied heavily on dual nationals to come in during that cycle. The Julian Greens, the Fabian Johnsons, because there were certain positions in his player pool that was completely lacking, and he absolutely needed to at least have balance and depth on his roster. And so he relied heavily on a lot of guys, the John Brookses of the world, to come in and compete and win World Cup spots. And yet there's still some people that look at a guy like DeAndre Yedlin, who made that World Cup roster, as like, as some sort of or Chris Wondolowski to make that team. And I go back to the fact, it's like, dude, look at the player pool. Look at the player pool at the time and tell me, like, if there was an international player that the U.S. had at its disposal at striker and at right back, that was better. Chances are pretty good those players probably would have featured at the World Cup. Unfortunately,
and that team got out of its group.
It got out of its group.
And that's far, right?
And it's like it's just mind-boggling, right? It's just mind-boggling. And of course, when Klinsmann gets dumped and Bruce Arena comes in for that third spell as the U.S. men's national team roster, there wasn't really a lot at his disposal. It was, it really was that, I guess you can say, some of the same core that Bradley had, that Klinsmann inherited. And there just wasn't necessarily a lot outside of Christian Pulisic, who, made his senior national debut at 17. But there really wasn't a lot for, Bruce Arena to necessarily work with. And then, of course, it results in us not going to the World Cup in 2018. And then, Arena steps down and the player pool automatically shifts. All those guys that failed to qualify obviously exit stage left. And then what is left at that stage when Triple G comes in, when Greg gets hired, what is left outside of Christian Pulisic, who at this time, I think, is he still with Dortmund at this time?
He's at the end of his Dortmund stretch, heading to Chelsea.
Right. And so from that standpoint, it's who is left. It's like Christian Pulisic, and I don't I'm trying to remember, like in 2019, had Wes taken that step into a first team role, or
I think they got caps. They got their token caps. They brought up in Windows.
Correct.
But all those guys,
what was left was
one or two type of thing. Yeah.
What was left really was the domestic pool at Greg's disposal to start that. And it was really over the course of the 4 years leading into 2022. And some of I'll be the first one to admit that Greg had some weird rosters for certain for certain international windows. I'll be the first one to admit it. But that being said, it's like when he took over, really what he had at his disposal was the domestic base pool.
And an era when soccer was struggling to actually even get in games because we had 2020 and 2021 and all of the restrictions on
COVID,
everything because of the pandemic. That affected an awful lot of that. Because you started wondering, will there be a world like in 2020? Is there going to be a World Cup? Was the like we already other things were being canceled in the world, all those sorts of questions were starting to come up, and I think that the guys that were here that he could really check out and really keep an eye on got the biggest look. I think that was almost default at that point, circumstance. So because travel.
Very good point. Very good point. But at the end of the day, it's funny because I think really this conversation really kind of ramped up during the Greg Berhalter era. I can't remember really having this conversation during Klinsmann and Bradley. Not at all. And the interesting thing though is when you're talking about constructing a roster, you're kind of looking at the head coach and his style of play and what he's actually looking to accomplish with his roster. And here's the, and I always say this as well too. And it's like, okay, cool. So you have a coach A that runs your national team that plays this style of play. And me personally, I always thought that Greg Berhalter always wanted to play like Barcelona 2012 or Brazil 1970. He wanted to play this beautiful high possession base soccer. Okay, cool. So it takes a specific skill set in order to play that style of football. Okay, cool. So you have domestic player A and international player B that potentially have a specific skill set, and maybe domestic player A does A, B, and C, which is something that his coach actually needs to facilitate a position where international player B doesn't necessarily, plays in a similar system, but doesn't need to have A, B, and C to be successful. It's DC, D, E, and F, which is how he's successful in Europe. And so there is a matching system in which the national team coach is going to pick a player A over player B. And I don't think where you play matters at all. No. I don't think, like me personally, I don't buy into this. If you play in Europe, you are automatically better than in playing in Major League Soccer. I just don't buy it.
The finances of MLS now, especially in the last 10 years, has changed that game completely, because you end up with guys that can have very successful long careers in MLS, paid well, develop and become national team players. And this is going to get into the guys who really are kind of the lightning rods of this conversation in soccer circles in this country right now, and that is the Seattle duo of Jordan and Christian, right? Like Correct. How long Morris was a part of the national team pool and why Christian is still a part of the national team pool. And it gets into that lightning rod of neither one of them has spent a lengthy period of time elsewhere. Jordan gave it a go, got hurt, came back, and then never went back. But Christian is, coming, 400 appearances with Seattle type of thing. So, their whole careers here, and they're a lightning rod for that argument because of it. We're seeing, the young players that are coming up of MLS once they're, 21, 22, and they're getting a chance to leave. Pepe, there's the whole question of Sebastian Berhalter, with Vancouver. Should he be staying there or heading overseas? The question is, how long will guys stay in MLS becomes a bit of the question. But there's now this whole last cycle has been so convoluted and messed up by U.S. soccer that a lot of questions are begged, and that's why a lot of these conspiracy theories start coming up right now, is because of that.
I think there's a lot of nervousness heading into this World Cup because of that convoluted stuff. Now personally, I didn't like the idea of Darlington Nagbe getting all those caps when he got all those caps, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, who else do you have? right? That was, for me, that was, I always ask those type of questions. Like, why is Jordan Morris on the World Cup roster? Well, because he's big, he's physical, and he's pacey, and he scores goals. Why was Jesus Ferrer on the roster? Well, because he went on a heater in 2022. And sometimes you're in the right place at the right time.
Yeah,
You know what I
peaking
mean?
well. Yeah. Being
It's like,
the hot hand doesn't hurt. Right.
I don't believe that Major League Soccer was like, you need to carry Jordan Morris or you need to carry Jesus for, like, I refuse to believe it. Right. Why, how come Jordan made the team and Ricardo Pepi didn't? Well, Ricardo Pepi wasn't Ricardo Pepi of today. Like Ricardo Pepi gets carried on the World Cup roster in 2026. In 2022, was he the same Ricardo Pepi? He was probably greener. He was probably,
he was still with Dallas. He was very, very green. A good player, good young player, a lot of potential. But you'd look at him and think, well, he's going to be on the 26 team, not the 22 team. That was the conversation around those guys. Morris was definitely a lightning rod for it. Christian is getting, I think, the brunt of that right now.
100%.
Yeah. And that gets us into the question that you kind of posed at the very, very beginning is the question of influence and meddling, right? That's the question you're posing. That is the premise of which we're having this conversation. This kind of gets us back to your initial question: is where is it? What is the quota,
what is the difference?
Is there quotes?
I guess the question that I have for you is, what is the difference between influence and meddling?
Influence is recommending your guy and walking away. This is my guy, give him a look and ask me any questions, rooting for your guy, backing him up. Quotas is when you start seeing teams maybe limit availability, doing things, to push do some things to meddle with you can meddle with when guys are available for different windows. If MLS's influence was super strong, they would not be getting rid of the January window. The off non FIFA window camp.
I think they're moving it to December, right?
Yeah, but they would be keeping that because that was the place for MLS guys to prove themselves. And they've basically said under Poach, we don't need to do that anymore. And that if that's the case, then that's because a lot of these young players are heading they don't stay at they don't stay with Philadelphia long. They don't stay with NYC very long. They don't stay, Obed Vargas is now playing in Mexico from the Sounders. Like, guys move on to other international opportunities. And if MLS had that kind of influence, then that would be getting amplified, not negated. Because that is a evidence of pushing MLS players, but it was also an opportunity for those guys to play and prove themselves. It was a chance to put up and shut up, because one of the biggest challenges in roster construction, and it's been a thing that's come up a bit, and it's a bit of that sniping that's going on between the current internationals and the guys who are now retired, has been, have they, dedicated themselves to the crest enough, and our guys stepping in and grabbing that spot and basically forcing the coach to keep picking them. Are they just grabbing, or are they just sort of showing up, playing here and there, saying I'll only play a half and leaving, just kind of that entitlement question.
Correct.
Coming in, and are we seeing enough guys coming in and dominating and demanding through their play that you have to pick them? Dempsey forced himself into that national team. He was playing for the New England Revolution, and he came out of nowhere on the international stage, and was one of the few shining spots of the 2006 team, and it led to him having that career in England, because he went out there and he just took it.
Correct.
And are enough of these guys in this window forcing themselves onto this team through the will of their play and form, and just saying to Pochettino and Berhalter before him, you have to get me, because not only do I have the resume, but I'm going to dominate training. I'm going to be the guy that looks good in every friendly. That hyper competitive thing that fans want to see, are enough of the guys doing that? And if they're not, if they're kind of saying, well, I don't want to worry about travel and stuff because I'm playing in Europe, well, then that opens up more door for MLS players, because that's who Poach is able to see every day because he's
right
living here. So
I would say that currently, yeah, there might be a few that have done that, right? I would probably point at a guy like Alex Freeman, who came in during last year's Camp Cupcake and impressed so much that he was essentially picked for the entire 2025 year.
Yep.
Diego Luna is another guy.
Luna's a guy who's just forced himself into the picture and just made you notice him. He's forced the coaches to make the choice because of the sheer force of just the way that they played. And at this level, you need those guys. That O2 team had it. That was O'Brien, Donovan. Those were the Olympic guys. They were 22. That was a young team, but they just played with a chip on their shoulder. They came in here and played at Safeco Field, a pre-World Cup friendly against Honduras in the spring of 02. And that really young team, and you just watched it and they just had a swagger. Like they knew they were going to be good, and they went out and they didn't take anything off. They went out and just demolished Honduras that day. It was 4-0 and not that close. And Honduras is generally a tough out at the very least. And even though it was a CONCACAF thing. And are we seeing enough of those guys approaching the national team that way or with entitlement? And that's the argument that the retired players are having, is they're seeing more entitlement than not.
I think there's a lot of things that go into that, right? Yeah. I don't want to sit here and question the heart of any of our internationals, because I don't think it's that. I think a lot of it has to do with we are now in a Nations League era where our calendar is strictly CONCACAF football, right? The last thing that the U.S. needed was more CONCACAF football, right? It's funny because home dude from Men in Blazers calls it CONCACAF 2 Electric Boogaloo, right? The last thing that this team needed was an excuse to play more CONCACAF football, and because it's the monotony of playing Panama 20 times in 2 years. It's hard to get up, especially for guys that are coming across, and even some of the domestic guys that have seen the exact same team over and over again. It's hard to get up for those type of friendlies, and so they have a tendency to be a little bit blasé on the pitch, right? And I think that's hard for some of the old guys, for some of the old heads that they didn't care if they had seen Mexico or Canada or Panama 5 times in a year. It's you're going to go out there and you're going to grind. We used to get so many good
friendlies against top teams. We saw that in the last window when we had, Belgium and whatnot, and we'll see that right before the World Cup with Germany coming here.
Senegal,
Senegal. But those and friendlies have only a certain level of value, but it still exposed the team to the national team was playing those games a lot. If you look at the friendly windows over time of the last 20, 30 years, coming to the US and playing was a fantastic option for the big European clubs. They'd come over, they'd get a nice training facility for the friendly window. Their players wanted to come because they're going to go play in New York or Chicago, someplace that was nice to go during the window. There'd be a big crowd, a nice payday. You play 45 minutes, but even though you'd have those as friendlies, those exposures were really good for the US players, because you still got to see your guys lining up against Germany and England and whoever was coming. And the loss of those friendlies in the window is what you're talking about, and it hasn't helped.
Or just traveling, right? Like we don't travel as a national team anymore, right? Like that's what I'll give Jurgen Klinsmann credit for. And I'll even give it to Bob Bradley as well too, because there was, they scheduled friendlies in Slovenia, in Italy, in the Netherlands, in the UK. They would play Scotland. They would take them to environments that, that would, on top of World Cup qualifying, they would adequately give them, that type of atmosphere that they are going to see in a World Cup. And I think those were invaluable travel trips for this national team, right? Because, and otherwise, especially, for domestic based players that don't necessarily get a taste of it, for those guys to get those, for them,
they got to audition. They got to
audition. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
and we just don't have that. Like you gain nothing, playing Canada 3 times a year in LA. Like it does absolutely nothing for the betterment of the national team. That's one of the things that me personally, like I would like to see this team travel a little bit more. I think the last time we saw this team travel was I think it was September or October of 2024. We went down to Guadalajara to play Mexico for a friendly. And then I think it was Jamaica in the Nations League, maybe. I think
it'll be interesting because the next window is, the next window is, Spain, Portugal, Morocco. So getting over there and scoping out and playing more in Europe is going to be essential in any friendly window that the U.S. has the opportunity to do it. The biggest challenge with that, though, is the U.S. soccer's reliance on ticket revenue of those games from the United States, and
television.
The appearance fees are going to have to be worth it to get the USO, to get them to be willing to schedule that.
Yeah.
But with the next tournament being, Spain, Portugal, Morocco, you definitely want to get your team over there more before the next one comes up. That's the problem with the next window and the next coach, and hopefully, Pep can deal with it. But
that's funny. Pep's not going to come to. Come on, man.
I know, but I love the conversation of it, though.
I would love to see Confederations Cup come back the year before a World Cup, where you have a 12-team tournament, where you have the the winners of the Nations League, whatever the case may be, and you have like a nice little 12-team introduction tournament prior to the summer before the World Cup. I think that if anything else, definitely helps the U.S.
It helped Bradley because the 09 Confederations Cup was in South Africa. They got down there. They got to scout out. They played really good teams. They got good results in full internationals, not friendlies, and gave Brazil a run. Yeah, and that was.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there not a Confederation Cup, but a Copa America during Klinsmann, not 2016 Centenario here in the States, but prior to the 2014 World Cup? It could have been in 12. We went in Brazil,
down there a couple of times too.
Because we were in Sao Paulo for a while, and I think it might have been a Copa America, and that's where the U.S. ended up staying during World Cup 2014 as well too.
Yeah, so I know that we got some of that. Yeah, those.
Yeah, we got some of that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the interesting thing about this conversation is, like, for me, I think influence is something that we've already touched on, which is like, for instance, like, let's just say that, Brian Schmetzer will call Mauricio Pochettino and just say, hey, listen, Christian Roldan is having the best year of his career. He's been here since 2016. And don't get me wrong, it's been a learning curve. But that being said, he is a quality veteran at this stage. Obviously was in the 22 World Cup. But that being said, look at the job that he has done over the course of the season. And of course, he was one of the biggest reasons why we lifted Leagues Cup. That's me as influence.
Also it also goes the other way. Poach is not doing his job if he's not calling up every coach that every player plays for at some point in time. Like, he's got to be in contact with all of the MLS coaches in some capacity.
I would agree.
He's got to be in touch with the Premier League coaches or championship coaches, Norwich, if he's not pinging in to coaches and players to touch base on his guys, what else is he doing? He's not coaching 60 games a year. So national team coaches should be doing that. And you absolutely have to see that Christian played his way back in to the the World Cup picture by that Inter Miami Leagues Cup final and how he played against Messi. And
Mhm.
Brian talked about time. So Poach absolutely saw that and went, my guy, right there. And you know that Brian absolutely backed his guy. But Poach had to see that. But the coaches have to be talking at that point. It's if they're not, what are they doing?
Mhm. And I
Uh,
and for me, that's influence, right? Where you have a coach
Influence is
talking to
fine.
influence is fine. Meddling for me is U.S. soccer overstepping and saying, "Listen, you have to take this player,"
Mhm.
or demanding a subset of players onto a coach without having that coach being able to actually vet those players, right? Calling them into a friendly just to be able to see them train. You know what I mean? To me, that's meddling, right? Or what you said, which is not having certain players available for certain windows where you're forced to carry, a certain subset of players because that's the only thing that's at your disposal. To me, that is 100% meddling. The interesting thing about it is Pochettino is in a unique spot because he didn't take over after the 2022 World Cup. So he was already his back was already against the wall
He's just looking
when
for
it came.
form. He's absolutely just
Yeah,
looking for guys in form. Like,
that's exactly right. And what's
yeah,
funny is like when he took over, like I remember when he was on the verge of being hired, and Mikey Varas, I think took the September friendlies in '04, and it was what it was. But when Pochettino came in for the October window, he essentially relied on U.S. Soccer to fill out that initial roster because he didn't have a scope of the landscape, and so he got his first look at certain players like the Yunus Musas of the world. He got his first look at Matt Turner and some of these players. And what was interesting about it is I always go back to this one saying, Jeff, and it is like first impressions last a lifetime.
they really do.
And your first impression to a new coach, I get the impression that that's the reason why certain players we haven't seen them in a long time, was because their first impressions with Pochettino weren't positive. And then when we get to the start of 2025, when he gets his first Camp Cupcake under his belt, and he brings in, he gets his first look at the domestic pool players. And by the way, that was supposed to be the January that Jackson Reagan was supposed to come in.
Hmm.
But I think he was carrying a knock, and Seattle wanted to keep him for the Spain preseason, by the way.
Right.
Um, that was his first opportunity to get a really like for a month to have his hands on with the Max Arfstons of the world and the Diego Lunas. And he came out of that. I think he came out of that more impressed than the two windows that he had, where he had, I guess you can call his A team. I got that impression because what we saw from the windows after, where you saw the Alex Freemans and the Diego Lunas and the Patrick Ajamains continue to get call ups, even when we actually had full strength squads.
Hmm. Well, yeah, and those guys did what you want, which was they took their opportunity
Yeah.
and made a good impression. The first impression was good, but they went out there and they grabbed it and they demanded attention from the coach. And when they got it, they've done good things with it. Poch didn't have the time for anything but form. He didn't have the
Mm-hmm.
time to build long-term relationships. He's not going to be here for 5 years. He's going to be here for 18 months, right? He had to find a team of guys who were ready to go. And when he said it didn't matter where they were playing, he didn't have time to care about where they're playing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're playing in the first division in the United States or the first division in Holland or the first division in Germany or whatever, great. Obviously, some of those leagues are deeper, stronger leagues. No one's making that argument. But the question is can you look at their form? Can you look at their fitness? Can you look at their their results that they're getting, their competitiveness, and are those guys ready to step in and play the system he wants them to play? And I think that Poch has been better at that because he doesn't have time not to. And last fall we talked, and I was kind of like, well, who is the national team, right? And we were hoping that in the fall
Right.
window and the winter window would come together, and we started to see that happen, right? I was a little I was much more discouraged about the last window than you were, but I definitely feel more confident that Poch knows who he wants his team to be, and it's who Poch
Correct.
wants his team to be. It is not because Don Garber told him to.
That's 100%.
And that is the point that we're in absolute agreement on, and why we're here talking tonight, is because that this is the team. Poch is he's trying to find that team, and what he really wants is that aggressive team that was really showing a lot last fall when he was clearly narrowing his player pool down. We had a couple of windows where we get back together, beginning of fall, it's like, who's it gonna be? Oh, now we know who it is. We both feel like more confident that this player pool. That's what he wanted, and that's what he needs to transfer to June. Right? That's what needs to show up against Australia. That's what needs to show up against Paraguay, is that look that team had this past fall when we were both feeling a lot better about it. And that has nothing to do with MLS setting a quota and telling him who his team is.
Correct.
His team.
Correct.
Yeah.
Me personally, I look at our depth charts, and it almost feels like there's certain positions where it picks itself. There's going to be outliers, of course. There's definitely going to be outliers, but the reality is, it's like, when I and by the way, injuries also play a role into this as well too, right? Serginho,
every national team's got that problem right now. Right. Mbappe terrified France today. When he went down. Yeah.
So, and at the end of the day, it's like, when I think about this upcoming World Cup, it's like, there's probably going to be, just off the jump, there's probably going to be 7 dudes from Major League Soccer who make the squad. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it has to do with form. A lot of it has to do with depth. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're probably going to be one of the best players at that position because of A, injury, or B,
position-specific depth.
Yeah, position-specific depth. Yeah, position-specific depth, but also they're probably the best option at that position. You know what I mean? The idea that they're not taking Yunus Musa over a guy like Sebastian Berhalter, and again,
look what he's doing for Vancouver, right?
Yeah. It's like one is playing and the other is not.
Yeah.
But then there's the justification of the justification of a guy like Gio Reyna, and it's like, okay, well, dude's talented. What do you want from me? You know what I mean? It's like, I get it, understand. But that being said, it's like, there's always going to be that one player that talent trumps. Talent kind of wins out. You know what I mean? And I think we can both agree that Gio Reyna is probably one of our 26 best players that we can bring to a World Cup.
One of our 26 best players. That's not it. But can he stay on the field, and can he bring it when the time comes? And what's Poch's comfort level with that right now? He doesn't have the history with him that the previous administration had, right? So a little bit more of a clean slate there, and Poch is going to have a chance to make his own mind up on it differently, because he's got to look at the practical reality of who's healthy and ready to go. And if he keeps 1 or 2 guys because he just wants them on the roster, that's always going to happen when you're picking. Is it 26 now and no longer 23?
Yeah, it's 26 now.
It's 26 now because there's the extra round. Yeah, they added roster because you're playing one more game. Fine, because how many of those 26 are really going to play in those 3 games? Right? You're really looking at who's my 17.
Right.
For the group phase. Who's going to be my 8 who can play all 3 matches 90-90-90, and who are my 8 or 9 who are going to play 60-30, 30-60, 60-30.
Yeah.
in the rotation, and then everybody else is, because good things happen and because we have extra games, so we've already advanced and we want to make sure that we have guys ready in the third match because we're going to play the round of 32, round of 16, and then you suddenly you've played 21 guys, but spots 22 through 26 aren't going to play.
I would assume
in a short window.
Right. Two of those are going to be goalkeepers. And so that leaves you with,
but even then, there's
spots?
4 or 5 guys, and then how you place those guys on your roster. That's a good place to grab a young player from MLS and expose him to it as roster spot 26, because you're building him for the next tournament and keeping that in mind. That's a good place to grab a guy who's been a veteran and toiled away in Europe and can come over and understands that he's on the bench and gets the role of being there and mentoring and being the training player that's pushing everybody.
Right, which is where Tim Ream, right, and potentially Christian Roldan come into play.
Yeah, those roles within a roster are as much training and locker room and team build for a coach too, and that has to be taken into account. It's not just the 26 player all-star team fantasy league soccer that you're putting together. And if you just take your 26 best players, you may not have guys at certain positions, because maybe you have like 8 really good midfielders, but you only have 3 really good defenders. You can't just take the best overall. You have to take guys who fit spots and create balance and depth. And if you have some guys who can fit a couple of different spots and understand roles really well, that's going to be a big deal. That's going to be a big deal.
Right.
I have the good fortune last 2 weeks of seeing the U.S. women here in Seattle and talking with Emma and watching her development of players towards the next World Cup next year for the women's team, and how she's building it and having a full cycle and coming out of a tournament, and how she's been able to do it how she wants to. Poach does not have that luxury.
Does not have the same luxury.
He does not have the same luxury. Emma has been able to take her time and really build things and rest players and bring in players who are playing in the Women's Super League in England or France, and bringing up young NWSL players, which in a perfect world we would have had the last 4 years, but we haven't had because of how that was handled and how things played out. But it's the cards were dealt. And so right now, Pochettino has to get the guys in form that fit his roster and can get who's starting against Paraguay, who's starting against Australia, who is your bench depth in those games, and how are you going to man up against Turkey? And get you out of your group. And those are the only questions that matter right now, because it's April 24th, and in less than 2 months, we'll already know the answer to that.
Absolutely. And by the way, I can't believe it's April 24th. Good God.
I felt like 2 months from today. I do get to see some of it here in Seattle, so I'm going to be able to get Qatar and Bosnia and stuff like that. So
that's that's interesting. Just out of curiosity, how does Emma, what is her philosophy for bringing in young players, domestic based players? You know what I mean? Obviously, she has. Yeah, she has her core. Obviously, she has her core, but she also
managed to do a generational transition in the last year or two after the Olympics and previous World Cup. She's been able to do she has the U23, U20, U17 link. If you start looking, especially with the Rain have players in the last window that just finished. They had the starting goalkeeper for the senior team, and then four or five players at the U23, U20 camps and stuff like that playing all simultaneously. And some of them have had senior caps or whatever, but it was to get as many players through in those windows. Yeah, she has that. The way that this is playing out, especially with the NWSL right now, the league's depth is benefiting from the fact that there's cohesion there between those youth and senior call-ups. Like there's real cohesion there.
Yeah. And I firmly doubt that the commissioner of the NWSL is meddling in Emma Hayes' decision. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's curious how we're not having that conversation.
It's best case scenario there.
Yeah.
in the same organization,
It's
right?
the same organization, right?
It's the same
There's no
organization.
meddling or
Yeah,
influence on
because
the
Emma
women's
was
side.
able to. They just played Japan in a 3-game series, and Japan and the U.S. were the finals a few
Mhm.
years back against each other, back to back stuff. And so it was quality opposition, and they played a more veteran game first, younger group second. Kind of really got a chance to see it, and that's exactly what you want from those windows and stuff. But she's had the luxury of actually a full cycle to do it. And
Mhm.
Poch, if he would have, or if Berhalter would have been, or if they would have replaced Berhalter in December of 22 with the next guy, um, and it would have played out, that person would have had all of 2023, would have had the Copa. I mean, that was
Yep.
what we hoped would happen for the men, and it did. We're
Yeah.
seeing it. We're seeing it on the other team right
Yeah.
now.
It's 100%. That was my hope for the Copa America.
Yeah, my hope
That
my hope for what the US men would have been going through for the last 3 years is what's actually happening with the other team.
in with the
Yeah,
women's side,
but
yeah.
I do think that Poach is a pragmatist. He's the guy who's gotten teams through FA Cups and Champions League runs and things like that. And that's what he's got to build towards is those sorts of run right now. Is it's a brief window. How does he get through those 3 games to get out of his group? How does he win his next knockout round and stuff like that? And we're going to really see if that lack of international experience prior to this, or if the same approach that you could have in the short-term windows as a club coach in those sorts of tournaments, his Champions League experience and approaching those cup ties will pay off. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. And if that team that was playing last fall when we started feeling better about it is who comes out and plays, we can get a result against Paraguay, beat up on Australia, grab some points from Turkey, round of 32, which is weird to say.
Yep.
And then, it's a pretty forgiving opportunity to get out of the group because of only a third of the teams get eliminated. As long as you don't, crap the bed against Senegal and Turkey, you're going to get out of the group. You can't let Australia be a trap game and knock you down. If they draw Australia or something, suddenly we're having a different conversation. But how he gets
Yep.
that team, he's not going to be listening to that. He would have quit and gone back to Spurs if that was happening.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Oh, 100%. 100% that would have happened.
Yeah, he would have quit and gone back to Spurs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And he still very well could end up at Spurs this summer, especially if we end up going down. But that's a different conversation for a different day.
Yeah, Forrest did you no favors today. So yeah,
If we beat Wolves tomorrow, we go a point above the drop. So
this is true. That's true.
West Ham
West Ham's the thing. Yeah.
West Ham is the team.
Yeah.
I hate being in that position, but it is what it is. We have been fundamentally mismanaged into the dirt. You know what I mean? There's Leeds and Forest, and then there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us and West Ham underneath that. So that's how bad it's gotten. But all right. So I want to close this up by asking you a question.
Okay.
What was your favorite cycle?
Cycle, like the full cycle.
The full cycle.
I really liked when Bob came in because you had the Confederations Cup. We had our third Dos Acero. I loved the hexagonal, like I've said before. And then they went in and, you had the drama all the way through the Algeria game, Donovan's goal and all of that. That cycle was wonderful. I really did enjoy going back Bruce's first cycle. Samson had left, Bruce comes in, and suddenly you had the young guys like McBride and them really getting a chance to step up and take their place. And then, the Donovans and O'Briens forced their way in. And I just remember sleeping on my couch and turning on the TV at 3 a.m., to watching Korea, the U.S. playing Portugal. And that was the first Dos Acero match in Columbus. I loved those cycles. I've hated this one so much. because I was so optimistic at the end of 2022, and it's just been hard to keep that going. I really liked those particular cycles, because there was so much good with it. Yeah, I loved the grind of qualifying and stuff like that, because it was the CONCACAF matches that mattered, and then we would play friendlies against Germany and all these different things. Like, there was so much fun with it, when it would come around. So I liked that.
The interesting thing is, I got to agree. This cycle is trash. Just everything that's happened on the heels of 2022, it's been terrible. I wasn't that big of a fan of Greg's cycle either. I thought his national team was very passive. Yeah, it's like, we won some trophies. We won we won a couple Nations Leagues, like whoop-de-doo. It's like winning the Nations League to me is like winning a Gold Cup. It's like, okay, cool. I've seen
it's nice, and you should win it from time to time.
Yeah, for sure. But I've seen it 1,000 times. Like, I don't necessarily rate it. But the interesting thing is, my favorite cycle was Klinsmann's first. Because that was when Klinsmann was taking his show on the road, and we actually had some very good results. Now, here's the thing with Bradley's cycle, was that I didn't think it actually started well, because we had some matches. I think we lost to Brazil, we lost to Argentina. We had some big matches in the first couple of years of his cycle that we didn't necessarily play well, but it ended extremely well. Like, his cycle it ended extremely well with the Confederations Cup. And I think a lot of that played into the success that we had getting to that final. And then, having that World Cup where, I actually thought it was a pretty damn good showing. Although I thought that team was capable of getting farther.
Yeah. I thought they might get further in that match, and then they really struggled in that run of 16.
Ghana was our kryptonite there for a few cycles, but that 2011 through 2014, that 3 years that Klinsmann had running up to the 2014, I think we beat the Netherlands there, we beat Italy there, we beat Slovenia there. I think we drew with Scotland there.
And that was peak Clint Dempsey. I'm looking over your shoulder, and it was peak Clint Dempsey, right? That team had a swagger, and it was fun to watch. I just really liked the way that the team before did come together. But I can see where you're going with that, because Klinsmann forced them to play more high profile friendlies on unfriendly grounds.
Correct. And then the post 2014 cycle, going into 2018, the first 2 years were actually quite positive. And of course, that leads up to the Copa America Centenario, where we get to a semifinal, which I thought was fantastic, which was pretty good. It's sneaky. We actually do quite well in the Copa America when we get invited. We actually have had some very good results in the Copa America. What's funny about Samson's cycle was that it actually started off actually pretty well.
Yeah.
We had the 95 Copa, and we get to a semifinal there, which was actually kind of amazing, considering where U.S. soccer was in 95, considering that, we had just qualified for our first World Cup in 40 years in 1990. You know what I mean? And 5 years later.
And that hexagonal was fun. I went down to the Costa Rica game in Portland in 97. Great environment. Ramos scores. We had Preki playing. He had been
Preki. I forgot Preki.
Yep. And that team, they went on the road up the road in Canada and clinched. He had brought in guys like Wegerle. He had, but all of a sudden everything shifted after they qualified. Like, he just tossed that team out the window, and
it just ended on such a shitty note.
Right.
And what's funny is, I think Tony Meola was saying something about how Samson brought him back. And I think they had this conversation where, Samson went up to Meola and said, I'm going to bring you back into the national team fold, but you're going to respect me. And he thought it was the funniest thing he ever heard, because that's, he was like, that's not Steve Sampson, that's the Federation. That's the Federation talking, right? And I found that kind of interesting, right? Because Sampson actually has a pretty solid reputation among coaches.
Yeah, he actually
98 World Cup notwithstanding.
Well, the thing with Sampson, so the longest game ever, right? The 85 NCAA title. He was Ziggy's assistant at UCLA in 85 when they came to the Kingdom and went to 8 overtimes to win a national title, because the NCAA didn't have things. Ziggy and Steve had, at the time, Ziggy was the Olympic team coach, and Steve was, and then Ziggy went to the Galaxy, and those guys kind of had a track that the two teams, the Olympic team and the senior national team, had a pretty close relationship, and a lot of guys transferring over, in part because of the relationship between those coaches at the time was kind of interesting.
I always wondered why Siggy never got a shake as the top guy with the Federation. I always wondered that.
I always wondered that too. He was successful everywhere.
Yeah. Right.
He won national titles with UCLA. He won trophies with, LA, Columbus, Seattle. They won trophies. Eventually, as the game changed, and a lot of coaches, maybe it went away. But now Ziggy's beloved here in Seattle, and should be. Every coach eventually gets fired. That's the way it is. But no, Sampson's relationship though with that team was interesting, because I've seen the Winaldas and the Harks and stuff because of all the controversy stuff. There was some real bad blood there between how some of that played out. The whole captain for life thing.
That's funny. The captain for life.
Yeah,
that's funny. That's funny.
But no, I look through all of this and I think to myself, now we've talked about this point. We don't believe that there is this quota system here. We're in agreement. Yeah. But I do agree that there is influence and people will push for their guys. But I also don't think we have a coach who gives a shit. Pochettino is an outsider. He has part of the benefit of him coming in was that he wasn't a part of any of that machine, and it's probably allowed him to push back against any of that meddling more than other coaches might have in the same cycle. And maybe people would have a fear of Berhalter not being able to do and things like that. Did he sell himself out to get back into the gig and things like that was a conversation I saw. But Pochettino is here to do a job, and that job starts in about 7 weeks. And that job is to get them to 6 or 7 games.
Yeah.
Not
if
just
not to the
4.
If not to the
at least 5.
Yeah.
Got to be at least 5 games. He's got to get them to the round of 16 and make a good showing, and hopefully get him to a quarter. If he does, then Pochettino will write whatever check he wants to any club that is looking for a coach, and he will get the best job available.
I would assume.
But the next cycle can't be this. The next cycle needs to have its coach. And when you just lost the guy who's going to hire him, like we're looking at a slow start again in the summer if they don't know who's even going to hire the next coach, right? That guy's empty.
My hope right now is that U.S. Soccer has a list of 3 names that they're going to hire for their sporting director. And I would assume that Iguchi Onyewu is probably, like, from what everything I've heard is that Matt Crocker was not really a present sporting director. He had to come to the U.S. when he was required to come to the U.S., but he was based in London.
Right.
And so Iguchi Onyewu on the day-to-day basis was the one that was carrying doing the heavy lifting for Matt Crocker. Mm-hmm. And so it almost seemed natural that that Gooch would probably just slide into that role.
If he does,
Uh,
that's not a bad hire. I think
it's not a bad hire.
Not a bad hire.
But I guess the question is like, what type of, what kind of coaching profile is he going to target? Is he going to, and again, timing is everything, right? And especially if, Pochettino has a phenomenal World Cup. And of course, that's why he was brought in to, to essentially win with this, what's considered a golden generation. And if he's able to succeed, and the timing is right, who knows? Maybe he signs up for another 4-year cycle. I doubt that he's going to do that, because I would probably assume Manchester United is going to come calling. I don't.
I was going to say he's going to be in red.
Yeah, he's going to. Yeah. And if it's not Manchester United, then it could be the red and black of I don't think he cares as long as he's in the Premier League. I think he wants to be. Yeah. I think he wants to be like, his dream is to be in London. Yeah. And I certainly don't think that he's going to end up at Chelsea. They have a new opening, but I don't get me wrong, Chelsea will bring back their former coaches. They did it with Mourinho a couple times. Yeah. They've done it before. But that being said, it's, he wants to be in England, and I would probably just assume. But that being said, it's like, if you're United and Carrick has done a job to get him into the Champions League, it's like, are you really going to let Michael Carrick go? But again, timing is everything, and who knows, maybe he signs on, but I would probably assume they're going to turn to an American-based coach. And the thing about it is Pellegrino Matarazzo is not coming to the national team. Pellegrino.
This is not the time when he will be doing that.
That's exactly right. And it's like, when you look at the job that he did with Real Sociedad, when they were essentially in the relegation zone, and not only did he bring them up into the top 10, but he wins a Copa del Rey. And he becomes the first American coach to lift a European trophy. He's not coming to the national team. It's like, if you're going to go international,
the check that they would have to cut,
yeah,
and the creativity to finance it exists, is not going to go to him at this point.
That's exactly right. Realistically, your international names are probably going to be on the level of an Hervé Renard. You know what I mean? Like, that would be the level. And it's like, you have to ask yourself, well, okay, cool. So if that's the level that is available, do we have the same level here in the United States? And if the answer is yes, then you're going to turn to somebody here in the United States. I did a show on this
MLS coach that you think it'll be. If there was an interview pool, who would you expect to be the 3 that would walk through the door?
I have a 1A and a 1B, and then I have a clear C. My 1A is Brian Schmetzer.
Yeah.
Because he has won literally every single trophy in the United States.
And I think he wants the job.
And he's 63 years old, 64 years old, and this would be a perfect way to end his career with the national team. And he might even have the potential to be a 2-cycle guy if, depending on results, whatever the case may be. But what I like about Schmetzer is the fact that he's not afraid to play young guys, and he actually trusts young guys, and he knows not only how to develop youth, not only knows how to develop youth, but also he knows how to manage big names and big egos. And I think because of the fact that he has won every single goddamn piece of silverware available, I think he comes in with a level of respect. Because at the end of the day,
players like him.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is, like, trophies are not easy to win at any level. And so when you have a guy that has won the biggest trophies in our country, that carries some sway. My 1B is BJ Callahan. Of Nashville, because he was the interim. And I think they won a Nations League with BJ, and
look what he's doing with Nashville, and look who's doing.
Yeah, and Nashville, by the way, is my pick to come out of the East this year. I think Nashville is legit. Yep. But the reality is, it's like, there's no time, there's not going to be that feeling out period. Players know who he is, and they know what the expectations level under BJ Callahan. And I also think that with Callahan, the national team is in a good pair of hands. Same thing with Schmetzer. And then
Schmetzer will also be handing off to Preki probably, and at a time when this particular wave would be finishing up, giving the next coach the chance to be involved in the turnover that is coming in Seattle.
Correct.
In a year or two. That would be a great time to walk away from it. And then, he could always do that run and come back in a consultant's role back in Seattle and be right back in the organization forever. Yeah.
Yeah. Me personally, there's nothing left to prove for Schmetzer.
Mm-hmm.
He's like I said, he's climbed the mountain multiple times, and I don't think he takes another job in MLS, and I don't think he takes a European job. I think it's literally he either retires as a Sounder or he goes to the national team. I think that's it. I think that's really it for Schmetzer. And my third, I know this is going to sound funny, but my third choice is either Bob Bradley coming back for a second, because I think Bob Bradley would be a very good hire at this stage, because again, he is a no nonsense type of coach who has an insanely high set of expectations, because he's already had the job once, so he already knows exactly what it entails. And when you look at what's coming through the pipe when it comes to U.S. youth, the Julian Halls of the world and the Kevin Sullivans and the Xavier Gozos of the world that look absolutely electric. I think I think that's very enticing, but also you're going to have some holdovers from this cycle as well too. And so the inclination or the want to merge the young and the veteran together to try to find that balance that he had between 2006 and 2010, 2011. I think that would be. I think Bob Bradley would be amazing. But also, if you don't want to go with Bob Bradley, then his kid Michael Bradley. And I get the impression that Michael Bradley is somebody that the U.S. Soccer Federation would hire.
And I feel like Bradley and the national team is an inevitability.
I think it might be too soon. Too soon.
It might be too soon, but I think there's an inevitability to a guy like Bradley ending up as the national team coach.
I agree.
The question is he the national team coach for the next window between now and Spain? But he's not a bad fit for what you've described.
Yeah.
I just feel like they're going to give it. I think they're going to give it to. I think this is the give it. This has a veteran coach sort of feel to the next hire.
There's also the likes of a guy like Jim Curtin. And Jim Curtin, I think, was on the short list the last time around. The last two times around. Right. I think he was on the short list when they hired Berhalter, and they was on the short list again when they rehired Berhalter. Ultimately, they went with Justin.
I heard his
Marsh
name bounce around a lot in that time period.
Yeah. And my biggest fear is a guy like Steve Cherundolo.
I was going to say,
that's my biggest fear, because he won an MLS Cup and a Supporters Shield with LAFC, but for the most part, he doesn't have a long and distinguished career. He was a youth coach in Germany. He was an assistant in Germany before going to the Las Vegas Lights, and then ultimately getting bumped up to LAFC, where he was gifted a roster that you didn't really have to screw. In order to not win, you really had to screw things.
Get out of your own way.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, get out of your own way coaching.
And my biggest fear is that they're going to look at Cherundolo's resume, and because he's a former player, that they're going to tab a dude like Cherundolo, who I don't think is competent enough to lead the U.S. men's national team. There, I said it. I'm just not a big fan of Cherundolo or his style of play. I'm sorry, and this has nothing to do with Seattle versus L.A. This is me taking that rivalry. And
if you put those resumes side by side and didn't know who you were talking about, I think you'd be saying the same things. Brian was the 18-year-old, pro that had to deal with the grizzled old coach.
Yeah.
He walked into Alan Hinton's office as a rookie and, had to earn his way into playing time over a few years there in Seattle and everything. And I think that has rubbed off on him his entire career. It rubbed off on him as a player. It's rubbed off on him when he was an assistant coach at first and whatnot, because he was an assistant player when the Sounders came back in the mid-90s. Then he was assistant with Fernando Clivio indoors briefly before taking over. And when he took over the USL era team, they were immediately successful, and they were an organized, professionally. Like when you watched how they approached matches, how they came out for training, it was different than the other clubs of that. Yeah, they came out like his approach was very much what he got from being coached by old British guys when he was young. They came out and they were ready to play, and his teams were immediately ready to play. And he's been successful for a long period of time. He also had the willingness and understanding to step down in job, to step up in league, and was the main assistant with Ziggy before taking over. And he was a very much a big picture coach. He doesn't panic when you have 3 or 4 bad games. He understands the end of it is what you're targeting. So if he knew that he had a 3 or 4 year window to build a team to, and a Copa here and a qualifying there, and things like that to peak at and do, you can totally make the case for him. And I absolutely think he would want it. Like, he would jump at it. Like, that's the only reason he would leave.
Correct.
And he could do most of it without leaving. Like, he could do that job from here. And so he would be a great fit, especially at 63. So that's not a bad thing. And all you have to do is, if you see the clips of him and stuff, how he talks to players and the thing, how he handles the media, he answers questions pretty directly. He doesn't BS his way through things. He doesn't talk around something. If you ask him a question, he'll give you an answer. And if you don't like the answer, that's still his answer. Like, he didn't just give the answers people want to hear. I think that would go a long way too. So those are, although I think BJ would be a great hire.
I think it would be. I think I don't think you go around with either.
Especially given that he had that little toe in the water.
Yeah. Correct. And I think that when it comes to the Euro snob section, I think they would actually be okay with a guy like BJ Callahan. What I will say about Brian is, one of the things that I absolutely love about him is his stabilizing presence. Mm-hmm. And you understand how this goes, right? Like, when a coach gets past the 5-year mark, and especially if he's had the same group of players, that messaging can fall flat. It can get stale. And when you look at the Sounders for the last 5 years, they've relatively had the exact same core in place as it's been aging. And yet this team is still a top 3 team in the West every single year. Mm-hmm. Even when they have catastrophic injuries, when they lose key pieces, he's able to plug and play, and the team still is competitive. They won a trophy last year.
The 5 teenager game a couple of years ago is the perfect example. Started 5 teenagers and still went out and won. It wasn't even that he started them because he had to. They went out and got the job done. Yeah.
And it's the stabilizing presence and the messaging that he is able to convey that gets players to absolutely run through a wall from. And I think that is something that would be very beneficial for the national team as well too. But that being said, it's like
you can look at how Ladero responded to him. Yeah. You can look at how Rusnak has responded to him. Those guys are your big money. The guys you're writing the biggest checks to, and they very much have a respectful relationship with their coach, and that doesn't happen easily or often when players come here. That's not always the case, but you've seen it with how he handles it. They're just I feel like he could be successful in that role. But BJ's not a bad hire, but like you said, Trundle is the sort of guy that they might hire, though.
Yeah, that's my biggest fear. Before we take off, man, who is your guy? Who is your guy on the national team? Did you guys?
Absolutely.
Who's your guy?
There's a couple of them over time. I mean, I'm a lifelong goalkeeper, so I've always loved that group when it was Casey and Brad and them. But as far as my guy goes outside of that, I really liked Brian McBride
Yes.
because I loved the way he played. His game had more to it than how he was always used. But when it was necessary for him to get his back to goal, and it was necessary for him to come back to the ball, he could bring those things. But he did, the not flying it. I loved me some Brian McBride in that era.
The best aerial threat that we've ever had. That dude was a killer in the air, and the knot on the head was courtesy of Rafa Marquez.
I was a big Tab Ramos fan.
Yeah,
I loved Tab's game. He had a game that would have translated to any era. He didn't get enough of a spotlight because of when he played. But Tab was good enough to play in Spain at that time and get playing time. Like, that was how good Tab was. And I just really liked those guys. I loved the coming out in early 90s Harks. That era, when John was that guy. In the modern era, I loved Clint.
obviously.
I loved how he brought it to it. I would have loved to have seen more Johnny O'Brien, have his career longer than it was. Those are the guys that come to mind first for me.
Johnny O was awesome.
Johnny O
was
those are the
awesome.
guys that come to mind for me with it. And that's just kind of what the first ones that come to mind with that.
Sure.
Right now, I don't know who I would pick out of the current pool. There's some players who I very much respect their games. I'm not saying that I don't, but picking the guy that I'm going to buy a ticket to, I don't know for that. But every era, I want to see who pops in June and becomes the star, and that we go through. Who's going to be the guy that at the end of who was the guy at the end of Qatar we were all high on. There were a couple of guys, Tyler and them, that we were really high on. So it's like, I want to see whose game pops from that.
Sure.
I'm hopeful there. But it is upon us. It is upon us.
Christian in the end of the Klinsmann, Bruce Arena, Dave Sarakin, Greg Berhalter leading into the 2022, where he was an absolute killer at times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that Christian is no longer the same Christian, even though Christian still is Christian. He's just on an ill run of poor form. But for me, obviously it was Deuce. Clint was just another dude. He was just on another level. The funny thing about it was that I was a big Eddie Johnson fan. I thought Eddie Johnson just didn't get enough run with the national team where he could potentially take over that spot, because, at the time, I think Josie was coming into form with the national team. And I thought Josie from 2009 to 12,
you could totally rely on him.
Yeah, he was unbelievable. I was a big fan of Stu Holden a little bit. Mm-hmm. I thought Stu had a good game, but it's the same thing with Johnny O'Brien. He was just too injured, and he just wasn't able to excel at the national team level.
For very long. He had a great World Cup in 02.
Yeah, he did. Marcelo Balboa for sure.
I loved. Yeah.
Balboa was a killer. I was a big fan of Wijnaldum, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, being a fan of goalkeepers as well too, man. Tony, Miola gets overshadowed because of how good Brad Friedel, Keller, and Tim Howard ended up becoming for the national team, right? But people forget that Miola for a time there was.
If you get a chance to watch any clips from like the 90 World Cup, obviously the Czech game was crazy, but if you ever get a chance to watch the the clips of the Italia 90
Mm-hmm.
match in Rome against Italy.
Italy.
Miola was a big part about Miola kept that game close with some
Yep.
presence. But his game against England in the 92 US Cup, where he was just it's like he was on it playing a video game and he just had the cheat
Yep.
code. He was just a cheat code against England on that. Keller had a
Mm-hmm.
game like that against Brazil too, where they just looked like they had the cheat codes going. Yeah, Winalda had some great moments and he brought a lot to it. Marcelo had the great early goal in MLS history with the bike when he was with Colorado. Yeah, a lot of those guys were fantastic to look at, and what they brought to it, and their care for the crest at a time when not as many people were watching. They did it in a little more obscurity at parts of their career.
Mm-hmm.
That was an awful lot to have to deal with. I was a big fan of just how those guys grinded through some of what they had to deal with to get there. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because
Yeah,
I mean, yeah,
McBride was at that time was one of my guys. The guys that never really got a lot of shine were guys like Chris Henderson and
mhm.
guys like Clint Mathis. I thought Mathis was awesome too. I have to admit that I may have been wrong about Josh Wolf. I may have been wrong. I thought like when Josh Wolf first came into the US national team and he was kind of a little bit on a heater in Major League Soccer, I thought Josh Wolf would be probably one of those next guys, and it just didn't materialize.
Yeah, he had some moments. He was
Mm-hmm.
the second goal in the first Dos Acero where he just
Yep.
spun around.
Mm-hmm.
He had the Mexican defense like doing
Yeah.
pirouettes.
Yep.
Yeah, Mathis had his World Cup moment against South Korea. A lot of those guys had moments, and there was some potential, and they had in their own way nice careers.
Yep.
In their own way nice careers. But like right now, it's hard to pick who I
Yeah.
would really want to do that. I have some guys that
Maybe
I do enjoy
Wes.
seeing their game. Yeah,
Maybe Wes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
Wes.
mean, you enjoy their game. When Pulisic, the first part of last fall, he was the best guy at the start of Serie A last year.
Mm-hmm.
He was the best guy in the league for a while there.
Yeah.
It's been a up and down season for him, but there was a stretch there where he was
He
the best
probably,
player.
yeah. Yeah. He was looking like he was going to win the Golden Boot in Serie A for sure.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, when it comes down to it, the first name that pops into mind for me becomes McBride. I just
Yeah.
loved his game. I loved his flying goals. I loved how hard he played. I loved that his game developed over time and added to it. I love that he had a leadership quality to him by example. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish this team had a Brian McBride on it. Any
He's
of
a
the
family.
names that any of the names that we've mentioned in the
It's
last
interesting because
5-10
almost
minutes.
all of our guys were also gut check guys that were
Mm-hmm.
really, played with a chip,
Yep.
and
I
everything.
agree.
Yeah, yeah.
I agree.
That definitely explains why we can talk for so long. So is that we have that. So
uh, well, I think that's going to do it, Jeff. I do appreciate you coming on last minute. I know that I know it probably was a surprise, but I did want to have this conversation because it bugs me. It bugs me when people talk about this without any type of nuance or any type of context, where it's like
it leads to some interesting discussions.
it does. I will say that, but at the basis of it, me personally, I just believe it's rage bait, 100%
Yeah,
pure, pure and simple. It's
yeah,
rage bait, and it's not rooted in any type of fact. Like today I was talking to this one guy. He was like, "Well, it proves that there's a quota," and I was like, "What's your evidence of it?
yeah.
Seriously, what's your evidence of it? I mean, if you're going to say something like that, you need to back it up." And the reality is, and I think you probably hit the best point where it's like, listen, if any coach of the U.S. men's national team was ever propositioned, with a quid pro quo, like if you do this, I'll do that, a coach is going to say, you know what, I quit.
Yeah, because if you're coaching at that level, your next job is available.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah, you're not tied to it. You're going to look around and just say that no mas, you know.
Yeah, and and by the way, it's not attractive for a national team, our national team coach, to be propositioned with a high level job in Major League Soccer. Because if you're taking the reins of the U.S. men's national team and you do a good job, that door over in Europe is going to be wide open for you.
Oh, yeah, poach, especially if June goes well.
Yeah,
You know,
100%.
If Paraguay and Australia go well, so that the Turkey game is a chance to clinch some seeding, his agent will be fielding 8 calls that night from
100%.
And his agent's already fielding calls. Like there's an ideas out there, but the sexiness of the hire with the fan base where he goes to next, and yeah, London, of course, I'd love to go back to London. I've seen one proper English football match there in London, and I'd want to see more. But you know, I would love to go coach one of those teams or be a part of those fandoms and things like that. Those supporters groups would be awesome to be a part of. But you know, he's going to have that opportunity. You know,
Sure.
He's going to have that opportunity. He's been successful before. He got this job because he's been successful, and I don't think he's necessarily set himself up poorly. I think he's going to have a team that gets out of the group and does fine.
Yep, I do too.
I mean, unless they absolutely shit the bed against Australia, we get through.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they start off with Paraguay, a solid
first game.
A solid South American team, but it's certainly not Argentina.
Right.
Or Brazil. So it should be a competitive match, but you're absolutely right. Like if they draw, my biggest fear is like they draw against Paraguay, draw against Australia, and they need to beat Turkey.
Yeah.
To get through. For me, that's like the worst case scenario. That
would be like the 98 and 06 teams.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you lose to like the 98 team lost to Iran, the 06 team.
Yeah, I don't want to have a 3-cycle rivalry like we had against Ghana. You know what I mean? Like I want to avoid the 3-cycle rivalries.
Yeah, I do think, even though after the last window I was a little skeptical, I do think that a lot of it is pacing right now and getting guys ready for what's coming. The international window is so crowded and so convoluted, and players are having to work on how and when they peak in ways that is different than maybe in the past. The MLS guys are coming off of, especially the Sounder guys, coming off a brutal 25, and then into this. Hopefully we'll talk again after Senegal, and see where we're feeling. But if they look good in that Senegal Germany, I'm saying look good. I don't care about the scoreline in those games.
I don't either.
Necessarily. I care about what I'm watching on the field, and if form is there, and if there's an attitude that I see of a sense of urgency that they're really wanting to amp up to build to that match with Paraguay and things like that, then I'm going to be just fine.
Yeah.
Just go and do it. I think we know who his core team is going to be. I don't think there's going to be a lot of surprises. Injuries will be the biggest thing right now. And, hopefully somebody will step up and score 4 goals in group play and become the next superstar.
That's the hope. Come on, Christian. Christian.
He's arguably one of the best players. He's not even arguably, but he's one of the better talents we've ever had. And this is the home peak of his career time to showcase that. This is what you've played all these years for.
100%.
Is that really nice looking grass field in Seattle right now that they temporarily have. It looks so pretty there at Lumen, right? Well, it won't be called Lumen for a while at the Seattle World Cup Stadium. Because they have to get rid of all of the branding, right? So it's the
FIFA Seattle World Cup Stadium, brought to you in part by Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, Timex, whatever. Yeah.
But the grass looked really good. I went to the U.S. women played on it, the Tigres match for the Sounders, and then the St. Louis match, and 3 matches, bam, 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 in a week, and it still looked really good. It's not
Keep
like a
it.
lot of the temporary fields that are in for a week and just get torn up. It had a chance to
Right.
set. Like it's
Yeah.
looking pretty
Keep
good.
it. See it. Keep it.
Yeah.
Don't go back to the turf. The funny thing is
Seahawks
like,
won't, but that's okay.
yeah, I know. But the interesting thing though is like I remember last year during the Copa, they literally put grass over turf. They literally put the grass over the turf,
No, they
and
do that. Yeah.
yeah, and it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. It was funny. It was funny when the U.S. were playing in Atlanta, and you saw like the bounce.
Mhm.
Like when they were taking a step, it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever
Now
seen. Anyway,
this one looks good right now. It
yeah.
looks really good. Yeah, I would love to see it last. I would love to see the sound. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was funny though because there was one pass against St. Louis where I think the guys they sent a through ball to Jordan and it died, and I think it was we were sitting there watching going, they're used to the turf, so they played
They're
it to
used to.
the
Yeah.
they played it to the field turf and needed to hit it harder. It was like one of those
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, that's right, we're on grass.
We're on grass.
Yeah, we're on grass. But now
Or-
the Sounders are looking good right now. Hopefully the US men will. And
Yep.
yeah, let's hope the football on the field gets rid of the bad taste of a lot of the crap happening off the field with the tournament and prices and gouging and all that stuff that's coming up. So I do get to be at least one of the matches in Seattle.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I
There you
will
go.
be at
I'm
Qatar,
like,
Bosnia.
I will be scouting the secondary market leading into that Australia game because my hunch is that the same thing that happened at the Club World Cup will happen
Just
with that all of a sudden you're going to be able to find affordable tickets when the threat of half empty stadiums because of the prices have completely priced everyone out, that
yeah.
FIFA is going to look at it and be like, all right, cool, we'll just release these tickets at this price because obviously they want to sell the tickets. They don't want to have a global tournament.
They just did this week release some tickets for Seattle that were a little cheaper for like the Qatar games and stuff like that. They were a few $100s less, but even still, like,
yeah, it's like I don't like it's if it's like if you're going from 1,500 to 1,200, that's still not, you're like it's yeah. All right, well, that's going to take care of it for us, Jeff. I want to say thank you. A quick reminder for everybody that coming up tomorrow there is a double live stream, and it starts at 9:30 tomorrow morning Eastern time as Spurs travel to the Molineux to pick up the much needed 3 points to stay above the drop. And so hopefully we will see a spirited effort as we saw against Brighton last week. And of course, I can dream, and I will continue to dream because we are staying up. We're not going down. I'm going to say it. If I say it 3 times fast, hopefully Beetlejuice will show up and we'll stay up. I don't know. And then in the evening time, it is the MLS live stream as Minnesota United host LAFC in a 3-4 Western Conference showdown. That should be fun. So please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and hit the notification bell as well too, so you don't miss out on any of those 2 live streams. You were about to say something, Jeff. So say what you got to say about.
I want to see how the Sounders play more on grass. They've now played 2 of the games on grass here, and yeah, if they can rack up some points early like they've been able to do to place themselves into a good position before the break, and then guys like Jordan are going to get a rest. Like they're going to be able to get more out of some of those guys in the second half of the season, especially when they're going to come out of the break in a good place in the standings. Like that
Are you talking about a deep playoff? Are you talking about a deep playoff run this year?
Their odds of one go up. Yeah.
Because I actually thought I thought that was going to be a possibility last.
Oh, they looked
year.
against Tigres, sure.
Yeah, and of course Minnesota United. That second leg against United still pisses me off today.
Yep.
You go down. You're up 2, and you're also up a man as well too, and you end up losing that match. So yeah, still pissed. we're also not playing a Club World Cup this year, so we don't have the extra added matches.
Yeah, only a handful of Sounders will be involved in the World Cup. I mean, Christian's going to be there, and Nuhu. Yeah. There's a couple of guys that'll be there. And they'll have a few guys getting there, and that's fine. That's good exposure for it. But they're going to have a chance to actually have a team that's not burned out in July.
Yep. So maybe, although the Western Conference is kind of nice, though. It's kind of nice this year. And it's going to be interesting to see exactly how that shakes out in the second half. But that's going to do it for us, guys. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. It's been fun. Jeff, thank you again for showing up on short notice, man. This was a good conversation. So I will see you guys tomorrow. And I want to thank you guys for tuning in. It was really fun. Until next time, take care.